Hi, I'm Vanessa Caldwell. 3 years ago, my family cornered me in my childhood living room and told me I was too soft for my own good, that I'd never survive in the real world. They didn't know I'd just closed my 32nd case without a single loss. My sister called me pathetic to my face while wearing a necklace I'd bought her with my first prosecutor's paycheck. My brother laughed when I didn't fight back. What they couldn't see was that I'd spent 6 years perfecting the art of reading people under pressure, of knowing exactly when to speak and when silence cuts deeper. They treated me like I was fragile glass, but I was actually titanium wrapped in velvet. Now they're facing charges, and I'm the only one who knows where all the bodies are buried. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday evening, the kind of Portland downpour that turns the streets into mirrors and makes the streetlights blur into watercolor smudges. I remember because I was sitting in my car outside the Lake Oswego house where I grew up, watching water cascade down my windshield and thinking about how strange it was that my hands weren't shaking. My father had sent the text 3 hours earlier while I was in the middle of cross-examining a witness in a fraud case. Family meeting tonight. 7 sharp. Your presence is required. Required. Not requested. The word choice told me everything I needed to know about what kind of evening this would be. I'd seen that clinical, authoritative tone before in depositions, in carefully worded accusations, in the moments right before someone's world collapsed. But this was my father, and despite everything I knew about power dynamics and psychological warfare, some part of me still wanted to believe this would be different. That maybe, just this once, they'd called me home because they actually wanted to see me. I pulled my blazer tighter as I walked up the stone pathway. The house looked exactly as it always had, a sprawling craftsman with perfectly maintained landscaping and warm light glowing through every window. The rose bushes my mother obsessed over were trimmed with surgical precision. Even the doormat was spotless, as if dirt wouldn't dare accumulate there. I used my key, the same one I'd had since high school, and stepped into the entryway that smelled like vanilla candles and old grudges. Nobody greeted me. The hallway stretched ahead, hardwood floors gleaming, family photos lining the walls in expensive frames. I noticed immediately that several photos had been replaced since my last visit 6 months ago. New pictures of Isabel at some charity gala, Trevor accepting an award at his architectural firm, my parents beaming at a holiday party. I wasn't in any of them, but that was nothing new. I'd learned a long time ago that in the Caldwell family narrative, I existed primarily as a cautionary tale about wasted potential. The living room opened before me like a stage set. My entire family was already positioned, and the arrangement was so deliberately orchestrated it might as well have been choreographed. My father sat in his leather armchair, the throne he'd occupied for 3 decades of family meetings and unilateral decisions. My mother perched on the love seat, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap like she was posing for a portrait. Isabel lounged on the couch with her fiancé Keith, his arm draped over her shoulders in a possessive way that had always made my skin crawl. Trevor stood by the fireplace, one elbow resting on the mantel, looking like he was rehearsing for a cologne commercial. The coffee table was bare. No drinks, no snacks, none of the usual hospitality my mother prided herself on. This wasn't a gathering. It was a tribunal. "You're late," Trevor said without looking at me. His voice carried that particular blend of boredom and contempt he'd perfected somewhere around his junior year of college. "Traffic was bad on the bridge," I said quietly, taking the only seat left, a straight-back chair positioned slightly apart from everyone else. Funny how that worked. My father cleared his throat, the sound he made when he wanted everyone's attention without having to ask for it. "Vanessa, we need to discuss something serious. Your mother and I have been talking, and we're concerned." "Concerned?" my mother echoed, as if the repetition would make it more meaningful. "You've been pulling away from the family. You never come to events. You barely return calls. We raised you better than this." I folded my hands in my lap, a gesture I'd learned from countless courtroom observations. "Keep your body language neutral. Give nothing away." "What events?" I asked. "Isabel's engagement party," Trevor said. The firm's anniversary dinner. Dad's birthday celebration. You had excuses for all of them. I had cases, I said. Work obligations. Excuses, Isabel cut in. She leaned forward, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the lamplight. You always have excuses, Vanessa. It's like you think you're too important for us now. Too busy for your own family. Keith squeezed her shoulder supportively, playing his role perfectly. The thing about being a prosecutor is you learn to spot a setup from a mile away. You recognize when questions aren't really questions, when conversations have predetermined outcomes, when the verdict was decided long before you entered the room. This wasn't about my absence at parties. This was about something else, something bigger that they were building toward. I stayed quiet, waiting for them to show their hand. Your sister has something to tell you, my mother said, and there was a tremor of excitement in her voice that she couldn't quite hide. Isabel smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Keith and I are buying a house. A beautiful place in West Lynn, completely renovated, perfect for starting a family. We put in an offer last week. That's wonderful, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I genuinely wanted my sister to be happy. Congratulations. We need help with the down payment, she continued, and the smile shifted into something sharper. Mom and Dad are contributing, but we're still short. We thought you could help. After all, you've been working all this time. You must have savings. There it was. The real reason for the meeting, for the careful staging, for the united front. They wanted money. I thought about my bank account, carefully built over years of 70-hour work weeks and skipped vacations. I thought about my student loans, still substantial despite my salary. I thought about the fact that nobody in this room had ever asked about my life, my cases, whether I needed anything. How much? I asked. 20,000, Keith said, jumping in like he'd been waiting for his cue. It would really help us get into the place. Isabel deserves her dream home. $20,000. 2 months of my salary before taxes. I felt something cold settle in my chest, the same feeling I got when I knew a witness was lying but couldn't prove it yet. Did anyone ask if I could afford that? I said. The question came out softer than I intended. You're a lawyer, Trevor scoffed. Of course you can afford it. Actually, I'm a prosecutor, I corrected gently. Public sector. It's not the same as private practice. The silence that followed was loaded with something dangerous. My father's expression hardened. Are you saying you won't help your sister? I'm saying $20,000 is a significant amount of money, I replied. I'd need time to think about it. To look at my finances. Time to think about it, Isabel repeated, her voice rising. I'm your sister, Vanessa. This isn't some business transaction. This is family. Which is exactly why you should understand that I need to be responsible about this decision, I said. I kept my voice level, reasonable, the same tone I used when explaining complex legal concepts to juries. I'm not saying no. I'm asking for time. Trevor pushed off from the mantel, his face flushing. This is exactly why nobody likes dealing with you, he said. You make everything complicated. You overthink everything. You can't just be normal for once. Asking to review my finances before committing to a $20,000 loan is normal, I pointed out. It's actually the responsible thing to do. Your brother's right, my father said, and his voice had dropped into that register that used to terrify me as a child. You've always been difficult, Vanessa. Always stubborn. Your mother and I have discussed this, and we think it's part of a larger pattern. What pattern? I asked, though I already knew this was the next phase of their strategy. You've become selfish, my mother said, and she looked genuinely pained, like this accusation hurt her to make. Ever since law school, you've changed. You don't care about family anymore. You only care about your career, about proving something. Proving what? I asked. That I can be successful? That I can support myself? That you're better than us, Trevor said. He moved closer, standing over me in a way that was clearly meant to be intimidating. You walk around with this attitude like you're so much smarter than everyone else. Like we're all beneath you. I looked up at him, at his red face and clenched fists, and I thought about the 47 cases I'd prosecuted. The domestic violence cases where women described exactly this kind of aggressive posturing. The assault cases that started with someone standing too close, using their size to make someone else feel small. I stood up slowly, not breaking eye contact. I don't think I'm better than anyone, I said quietly. I just think I'm entitled to make my own financial decisions without being attacked for it. Attacked, Isabel laughed, but it was a brittle sound. Nobody's attacking you, Vanessa. God, you're so dramatic. This is why nobody can talk to you. Keith finally spoke again, his voice smooth and reasonable. Look, Vanessa, I think everyone's just a little emotional right now. We're not trying to pressure you. We just thought, given how close you and Isabel used to be, that you'd want to help make her dreams come true. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But the way he said it, the subtle emphasis on used to be, was designed to make me feel guilty. To remind me of some mythical past where my sister and I were close, which was a revision of history so blatant it would have been laughed out of any courtroom. The truth was, Isabel and I had never been close. She'd spent our entire childhood making sure I knew I was less pretty, less popular, less everything. When I got into law school, she'd told everyone at a family dinner that I'd probably only gotten in because of diversity quotas, despite us being white and from an affluent background. When I'd graduated top of my class, she'd said it was because I had no social life to distract me. Every accomplishment had been diminished, every achievement reframed as evidence of some personal failing. I need to go, I said. I have an early morning tomorrow. Of course you do, my father said. Work always comes first with you, doesn't it? He stood up, straightening to his full height. I raised you to value family, Vanessa. I raised you to understand that we take care of each other. If you can't do this one simple thing for your sister, then I question whether you understand what it means to be a Caldwell. The room went very still. I could hear the rain hammering against the windows, the old furnace humming in the basement, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. This was the moment, I realized. This was where they expected me to crumble, to apologize, to agree to whatever they wanted because the alternative was being cast out. I'd seen my father use this tactic before, on my mother, on Trevor, on anyone who dared to disagree with him. The threat of exclusion, of being deemed unworthy of the family name. What I wanted to say was that being a Caldwell meant being manipulated and guilt-tripped and expected to set yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. What I wanted to say was that I'd learned more about real family values from the victims I met in courtrooms than I'd ever learned in this house. What I wanted to say was that I was tired, so desperately tired, of being treated like I was failing some test I'd never agreed to take. Instead, I said, I understand. I picked up my purse, which I'd set on the floor beside the chair. As I turned to leave, Isabel called after me. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? You're not even going to fight for us? I paused in the doorway, looked back at her. What would you like me to fight for, Isabel? A house I'll never be invited to? A relationship where I'm only valued for what I can provide financially? She recoiled like I'd slapped her. How dare you, my mother gasped. After everything we've done for you. All the sacrifices we've made. I felt something inside me crystallize, hardening into a clarity I'd been avoiding for years. What sacrifices, Mom? Paying for a state school education that I supplemented with scholarships and 3 part-time jobs? Letting me live at home during law school when I was studying 90 hours a week and barely saw you? What exactly do I owe you that I haven't already repaid 10 times over? Get out, my father said. His face had gone purple. If that's how you feel, if you're going to throw our generosity back in our faces, then get out of this house. You're not welcome here until you can show some gratitude and some respect. I nodded once. Okay, I said. And I left. The rain had intensified, if that was possible. I sat in my car in their driveway for a long moment, watching water stream down the windows, distorting the house lights into shapeless blurs. My phone buzzed. A text from Isabel. "You're going to regret this. We're family, and family doesn't turn their backs on each other." The irony was so thick I almost laughed. I drove through the dark, rain-slicked streets, not heading home but not sure where else to go. Eventually, I found myself parked outside Stumptown Coffee on Division, one of the few places still open at 9 on a Tuesday night. I went inside, ordered a black coffee I didn't want, and sat in a corner booth trying to process what had just happened. My phone kept buzzing. More texts, now from Trevor. "You always were the selfish one. Don't come crying to us when you're alone and miserable." The barista, a young woman with purple hair and tired eyes, brought me my coffee. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I must have looked as wrecked as I felt. "I will be," I said, and tried to smile. She nodded like she understood and left me alone. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into my palms, and I thought about all the times I'd sat in this exact same position with victims and witnesses, people whose families had turned on them, who'd been betrayed by the people they trusted most. I'd offered them reassurance and legal protection and the promise that justice existed. Now I was on the other side of that equation, and I understood with a clarity that made my chest ache exactly how they'd felt. My phone rang. Dominic. I stared at his name on the screen for 3 rings before answering. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are you?" he asked immediately. "I heard what happened. Rochelle called me. Your sister posted something on social media." "Posted what?" I asked, though dread was already pooling in my stomach. He hesitated. "Something about how some people forget where they come from. How success changes people. It's vague, but everyone who knows your family will know it's about you." "Of course she did," I said. "Of course." "Vanessa," Dominic said, and his voice was gentle in a way that made my eyes sting. "Tell me where you are. I'm coming to get you." "I'm at Stumptown," I said. "Division Street." "I'll be there in 15 minutes, he said. "Order me a coffee." "And Vanessa?" "Yeah. You did nothing wrong." I hung up and stared at my phone, at the lock screen photo of me at the courthouse steps after closing case number 47, my face serious but satisfied, the way I always looked after a win. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone confident and certain and unshakable. I didn't feel unshakable. I felt like I'd just lost something I couldn't quite name, something I'd been holding onto without realizing it. When Dominic arrived, rain-soaked and concerned, he slid into the booth across from me without a word. He just reached across the table and took my hand, his grip warm and solid and real. We sat like that for a long time, listening to the hiss of the espresso machine and the murmur of other people's conversations, while the rain continued to fall and my phone continued to buzz with messages I didn't read. "Tell me what you need," he finally said. I looked at him, at his steady gaze and patient expression, and I realized I didn't know how to answer that question. What I needed was for the last 3 hours to have gone differently. What I needed was a family that saw me as more than an ATM or a disappointment. What I needed was to not feel like I was standing on the edge of something vast and dark that I couldn't see the bottom of. "I need to go home," I said finally. "I need to sleep, and then I need to figure out what happens next." He nodded. "I'll follow you," he said. "Make sure you get there safe." I started to protest, to say I was fine, but he cut me off with a look. "Don't," he said. "Let someone take care of you for once." So I let him. We drove through the wet streets in a small convoy of 2, his headlights steady in my rearview mirror, and when we got to my apartment in the Pearl District, he walked me to my door and waited while I unlocked it. "Call me if you need anything," he said. "I mean it. Anytime." "I will," I promised, and I meant it. Inside my apartment, I stood in the dark for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The space was small but mine, every piece of furniture chosen deliberately, every book on the shelves read and loved. The opposite of my parents' showpiece house, where everything was for display and nothing was for comfort. I changed into sweatpants and an old law school t-shirt, made myself chamomile tea I wouldn't drink, and finally let myself look at my phone. 17 messages. Most from my family, escalating in anger and accusation. One from Rochelle. Saw Isabel's post. Are you okay? Want me to come over? One from Judge Pemberton, my mentor. Heard through the grapevine you had a rough night. My door is open if you need to talk. And one more from a number I didn't recognize. This is Keith. Your sister is devastated. You should be ashamed of yourself. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to rain ping against the windows. Somewhere in the building, someone was playing music, the bass vibrating through the walls. Normal sounds, ordinary life continuing around me while mine felt like it was fragmenting into pieces I didn't know how to reassemble. I thought about my cases, about the evidence I'd gathered meticulously, about the way truth had a weight to it that lies could never match. I thought about how many times I'd stood in front of juries and explained that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who claim to love you. And I thought about what my father had said. Get out. You're not welcome here until you can show some gratitude and some respect. The finality of it. The easy way he'd discarded me, like I was a disappointing employee rather than his daughter. But underneath the hurt was something else, something harder and colder. A question forming, one I'd been avoiding for longer than I wanted to admit. What if I never went back? What if I just let them sit with their anger and their manipulations and their carefully constructed narrative where I was the villain? What if I stopped trying to earn approval I was never going to receive? The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I'd spent my entire life trying to be good enough, quiet enough, accommodating enough. Trying to smooth over conflicts and accept criticism and shrink myself down so I wouldn't take up too much space in their lives. And where had it gotten me? Sitting alone in a dark apartment, cast out for the crime of having boundaries. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from my mother. You've broken your father's heart. I hope you're satisfied. I picked up the phone, opened the message thread, and typed a response. Then I deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Finally, I wrote simply, I need space. Please don't contact me for a while. And I turned off my phone. Sleep didn't come easily that night. When it did, I dreamed of courtrooms and witness stands, of standing before a jury trying to defend myself against accusations I couldn't quite hear, my voice not working, my evidence disappearing from my hands like smoke. I woke at 4 a.m, heart racing, and couldn't fall back asleep. So I got up, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, doing what I always did when the world felt chaotic. I worked. I had a case file to review, a fraud prosecution where the defendant had embezzled from a nonprofit that helped homeless youth. The evidence was solid, the testimony lined up perfectly, and as I read through the depositions and financial records, I felt something settle inside me. This, I understood. This made sense. People did wrong, there were consequences, justice could be served. Unlike family dynamics, where the rules changed constantly and punishment was doled out for imaginary offenses, criminal law had structure. Evidence. Standards. You couldn't be convicted on feelings or manipulated narratives. You needed proof. By the time the sun came up, weak and gray through Portland's perpetual cloud cover, I'd prepared my cross-examination questions and felt more like myself. I showered, dressed in one of my court suits, a charcoal gray that made me feel armored, and headed to the courthouse. Normal routine. Normal life. As if the previous night had been an aberration rather than an earthquake. But as I walked through the courthouse halls, nodding at familiar faces, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. That the person who'd driven to Lake Oswego yesterday wasn't quite the same person walking through these doors today. I just didn't know yet whether that was a good thing or a catastrophe waiting to unfold. The fraud case went to trial on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the family meeting that had effectively exiled me from the Caldwell inner circle. I'd thrown myself into preparation with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, because when I was cross-examining witnesses or reviewing evidence logs, I didn't have to think about the silence from my parents or the increasingly hostile messages from Isabel that I'd stopped reading after the first 5. The case itself was straightforward, almost too easy. A man named Marcus Henley had systematically drained accounts from Second Chances, a Portland nonprofit that provided housing assistance to teenagers aging out of foster care. He'd been the financial director, trusted implicitly, and over 3 years he'd siphoned off nearly $200,000 through a series of false invoices and phantom vendor accounts. The evidence was damning. Bank records, email trails, testimony from the executive director who'd discovered the discrepancies. But what made the case personal for me was the impact statement from a 17-year-old named Caitlin who'd been told there was no funding for her housing deposit, forcing her to sleep in her car for 2 months during a Portland winter. Meanwhile, Henley had been taking weekend trips to Las Vegas and buying a boat he kept in Marina del Rey. The moral clarity of it was almost a relief after the murky emotional manipulation of my family dynamics. I delivered my closing argument with a precision I'd honed over 47 previous victories, walking the jury through each piece of evidence, connecting the dots so clearly that the defense's claims of accounting errors looked absurd. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, I felt that familiar surge of satisfaction, the knowledge that justice, at least in this controlled environment, still functioned the way it was supposed to. Afterward, in the courthouse hallway, Judge Pemberton caught up with me. "Strong work in there, Caldwell," he said. His eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, studied my face with more concern than the compliment warranted. "You holding up okay?" "I'm fine," I said automatically, the same response I'd been giving everyone who asked. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. "My office is still open if you need it," he reminded me before walking away. I was packing up my briefcase in the empty courtroom when my phone rang. Dominic. I almost didn't answer, exhausted from the trial and not ready for the conversation I knew we needed to have, but ignoring him felt cowardly. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light. "Congratulations on the verdict," he said. I saw the news alert. 48-0 now. That's got to be some kind of record. "Probably," I said, though I hadn't actually checked. "How are you really doing?" he asked, and the gentleness in his voice made my throat tight. "I haven't seen you in almost 2 weeks. You've been dodging my calls." "I've been busy," I said. "Trial prep. You know how it is." "Vanessa," he said quietly. "Talk to me. What's going on?" "Nothing's going on," I insisted. "I won my case. Everything's fine." Except it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. The silence stretched between us, heavy with things unsaid, until finally Dominic sighed. "Okay," he said. "But when you're ready to stop pretending, I'm here." After we hung up, I sat alone in the courtroom for a long time, watching dust motes drift through the afternoon light filtering in from the high windows. The room felt sacred in its emptiness, this space where truth was supposed to matter more than feelings, where evidence trumped emotion. I wished my entire life could be conducted with the same rules, the same clear standards of proof and burden of demonstration. My phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. I opened it without thinking. It was a screenshot of a group chat I wasn't part of. The participants were Isabel, Trevor, my mother, and several names I recognized as extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins. The messages were about me. Trevor had written, "She's always been like this. Cold. Selfish. Remember when she missed Grandma's funeral for some law school thing?" My mother had responded, "I don't know where we went wrong with her. We gave her everything." Isabel's contribution was the most cutting. "She thinks she's so much better than all of us because she's got some fancy job. Meanwhile she's completely alone. No real friends. No relationship that lasts. Just her and her courtroom. Watch, she'll die alone and bitter." I stared at the text for a long moment, trying to figure out who'd send it to me. Then a follow-up message appeared from the same unknown number. "Thought you should know what they're saying about you. This is Aunt Carol BTW. I'm sorry, honey. You deserve better." I didn't respond. I just sat there, rereading the screenshot, each message landing like a physical blow. The funeral Isabel referenced had been during my second-year finals, and I'd flown back for it despite having a constitutional law exam the next day. I'd stayed for 3 hours before having to catch a red-eye back to campus. But in the family mythology, absence was binary. Either you were completely present or you'd abandoned them entirely. There was no recognition of the effort it took to show up at all. That evening, I went home to my apartment and did something I rarely allowed myself. I poured a large glass of wine and let myself feel everything I'd been compartmentalizing for 2 weeks. The anger at being called selfish for having boundaries. The hurt of being characterized as cold and friendless. The exhaustion of always being the villain in their stories no matter what I actually did. Halfway through the glass, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a paranoid moment I wondered if my family had decided to stage an intervention. But when I checked the peephole, it was Rochelle standing in the hallway, holding a bag of takeout and wearing an expression of determined concern. I opened the door. "You didn't answer my last 3 texts," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "So I'm staging a friendly invasion. I brought Thai food and I'm not leaving until you talk to me." "I'm fine," I started, but she held up a hand. "Stop," she said. "I've known you since law school, Vanessa. I can tell when you're drowning. So let's skip the part where you pretend everything's okay and get straight to the part where you tell me what's actually happening." So I did. I told her everything. The family meeting, the money demand, the accusations and ultimatums, the group chat messages, the systematic way they'd turned my absence into evidence of moral failure while ignoring every time I had shown up. Rochelle listened without interrupting, her face growing progressively more outraged. When I finished, she set down her pad thai and looked at me with an intensity that reminded me why she was one of the best defense attorneys in Portland. "That's abuse," she said flatly. "What they're doing to you. That's psychological abuse and manipulation." "They're my family," I said weakly. "So what?" she countered. "That doesn't give them permission to treat you like garbage. You know this, Vanessa. You prosecute cases like this. If a client came to you describing this pattern of behavior from a romantic partner, what would you tell them?" "I would tell them it was abuse," I admitted. "I would tell them they needed to protect themselves." "Exactly," Rochelle said. "So why are you giving your family a pass?" "Because they're supposed to love me," I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. "Because if my own parents and siblings can't see any value in me beyond what I can provide for them, what does that say about me?" "It says something about them, not you," Rochelle said firmly. But I knew she was wrong, or at least I felt like she was wrong. Some small, insidious part of me believed that if I was truly lovable, truly valuable, my family would have recognized it. The fact that they didn't must mean the flaw was in me, not them. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and twice as many texts. Something had happened, something big enough that even my request for space had been disregarded. With a sense of dread, I opened the message thread from my mother. "Call me immediately. It's about your father. He's had a heart attack." My stomach dropped. I called her back instantly, my hands shaking. "Mom," I said when she answered. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He collapsed at work," she said, her voice thin and strained. "They took him to Providence. He's stable now, but Vanessa, it was serious. We almost lost him." "I'm on my way," I said, already grabbing my keys. The hospital was a 15-minute drive that I made in 10, my heart hammering the entire time. Whatever our issues, whatever had been said and done, he was still my father. The idea of losing him before we'd resolved anything was unbearable. I found my family in the cardiac care waiting room, a small cluster of misery and exhaustion. My mother looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Trevor was on his phone, probably notifying the extended family network. Isabel sat with Keith, her eyes red and swollen. When I walked in, everyone looked up. For a moment, I thought I saw relief in my mother's face, but it was quickly replaced by something harder. You came, she said, and it wasn't quite an accusation, but it wasn't warmth either. Of course I came, I said. How is he? They're running more tests, Trevor said without looking up from his phone. It was a major blockage. They had to do an emergency procedure. Can I see him? I asked. My mother shook her head. Not yet. Immediate family only right now, Isabel said, and the emphasis on immediate family was deliberate. I'm immediate family, I said quietly. Not according to him, Trevor muttered. The words hung in the air like smoke. What's that supposed to mean? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. My mother looked away. Your father made some decisions, she said slowly. After our last conversation. He updated his will and his medical directives. Oh, I said, understanding flooding through me cold and complete. I see. He removed you, Trevor said, finally putting down his phone. From everything. The will, the trust, even the medical power of attorney. He said he didn't want someone with no loyalty to the family making decisions about his care. I sat down heavily in one of the plastic waiting room chairs. It felt surreal, like I was watching this happen to someone else. So you're telling me that Dad had a heart attack, and one of his concerns was making sure I couldn't be involved in his recovery. That about sums it up, Isabel said. She stood up, walked over to where I sat. You brought this on yourself, Vanessa. If you'd just helped us, just been a decent sister, none of this would have happened. You think Dad's heart attack is my fault, I said slowly. The stress you caused him didn't help, my mother said. The disappointment. Knowing that his own daughter couldn't be bothered to support her family. I looked around at all of them, at their unified front of blame and accusation, and something inside me simply broke. Not dramatically, not with anger or tears, but with a quiet, definitive snap. I stood up. I'm going to go, I said. Please let me know how Dad's doing. That's it, Trevor asked. You're just leaving? What else would you like me to do? I asked. Stay here so you can continue explaining how his medical emergency is my punishment for having boundaries? Sit quietly while you blame me for stress I didn't cause? I'm not doing this anymore. You never cared about any of us, Isabel said, her voice rising. This just proves it. Dad could die and you're making it about yourself. I'm not making it about myself, I said. You are. You've spent the last hour telling me I'm responsible for his heart attack because I wouldn't give you $20,000. Do you hear how insane that sounds? We're done with you, my mother said, and her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. After today, don't contact us. Don't come to family events. As far as we're concerned, you're not a Caldwell anymore. The finality of it should have destroyed me. Instead, I felt oddly calm, like I'd been bracing for this moment my entire life, and now that it had arrived, it was almost a relief. Okay, I said. If that's what you want. It's what you clearly want, Trevor said. You've been pulling away for years. Now you're finally free. Congratulations. I walked out of that waiting room with my head high and my hands steady, and I didn't look back. In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, staring at the hospital entrance, waiting for the emotional collapse I was certain would come. It didn't. Instead, I felt hollow, emptied out, like someone had scooped out everything that had been weighing me down and left only space behind. I drove home on autopilot, parked in my building's garage, took the elevator to my floor. Inside my apartment, everything looked exactly as I'd left it. Coffee mug in the sink. Case file spread across the dining table. The normalcy of it was jarring. My phone rang. Dominic again. This time I answered. They disowned me, I said without preamble. At the hospital. My dad had a heart attack and they blamed me for it, and my mom told me I'm not part of the family anymore. Silence on the other end. Then, where are you? Home. Stay there, he said. I'm coming over. You don't have to, I started. Vanessa, he said, and his voice was gentle but firm. Let me be there for you. Please. When he arrived 20 minutes later, I was still standing in the same spot in my living room, still wearing my coat, still holding my keys. He took one look at me and pulled me into his arms, and that's when I finally broke. Not with dramatic sobs or hysterics, but with silent tears that soaked into his shoulder while he held me and didn't say anything, just let me fall apart in the safety of his presence. I don't understand, I said eventually, my voice muffled against his shirt. I don't understand how they can just decide I don't exist. How do you do that to someone? Because it's easier than admitting they're wrong, Dominic said quietly. Because blaming you means they don't have to examine their own behavior. It's not about you, Vanessa. It never was. But it felt like it was about me. It felt like I'd failed some fundamental test of worthiness, like there was something defective in me that made me impossible to love. Dominic pulled back enough to look at me, his hands on my shoulders. Listen to me, he said. You are not defective. You are not impossible to love. You are brilliant and principled and kind, and the fact that your family can't see that is their loss, not your failing. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let his words sink in and heal something that had been broken long before the hospital confrontation. But all I could think about was the group chat, the things they'd said about me dying alone and bitter, and how maybe they were right. Maybe I was so focused on my career, so invested in my cases and my courtroom victories, that I'd forgotten how to be a person people actually wanted around. You're not alone, Dominic said, reading my expression. You have me. You have Rochelle. You have Judge Pemberton, who asks about you every time I see him. You have a whole life outside of them, even if you can't see it right now. That night, Dominic stayed over, sleeping on my couch because I asked him to, because the thought of being alone in my apartment felt unbearable. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe in the next room, and I thought about all the cases I'd prosecuted. The domestic violence victims who couldn't understand why their partners hurt them. The fraud victims who kept giving money to scammers because they wanted to believe in the relationship. The assault survivors who blamed themselves for not fighting back hard enough. I'd sat across from hundreds of people who'd been abused and manipulated, and I'd told them with absolute certainty that none of it was their fault, that they deserved better, that the problem was with their abuser and not with them. Why couldn't I believe the same thing about myself? Why was it so easy to see clearly when it was someone else's family, someone else's pain, but when it came to my own situation, I twisted myself into knots trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. The hypocrisy of it was almost funny, except nothing about any of this was funny. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because I woke to gray morning light and the smell of coffee. Dominic was in my kitchen, fully dressed, making breakfast like he belonged there. Morning, he said when I appeared in the doorway. I made eggs. You need to eat something. I don't think I can, I said, but I sat at the table anyway and let him put a plate in front of me. He sat across from me, drinking his coffee, not pushing, just present. After a few minutes, I picked up my fork and managed a few bites. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number. Another screenshot, this time from Isabel's Instagram story. A photo of her and my mother at the hospital, caption reading, "Family is everything. So grateful for the people who show up when it matters." The implication was obvious. I showed it to Dominic. He read it, his jaw tightening. They're gaslighting you, he said. They're rewriting history in real time, making themselves the victims and you the villain. And there's nothing you can do about it because defending yourself makes you look defensive. Exactly, I said. So what do I do? You do what you always do, he said. You focus on the truth. You document everything. And you protect yourself. He paused, studying me. Vanessa, I know this is going to sound extreme, but have you considered that this might escalate? That they might try to damage your professional reputation? The thought hadn't occurred to me, but as soon as he said it, I realized he was right. If they were willing to publicly paint me as a heartless daughter who'd abandoned her father during a medical crisis, what would stop them from going further? From contacting my office, spreading rumors, trying to undermine the career that was apparently the only thing I cared about? I don't know what to do, I admitted. I felt competent in a courtroom, powerful even, but this kind of personal attack was outside my expertise. You start by protecting yourself legally, Dominic said. Cease and desist letters if they continue the harassment. Documentation of every message, every post, every interaction. You build a case, just like you would for trial. He was right, of course. I was a prosecutor. I knew how to gather evidence, how to build a narrative, how to prepare for every possible angle of attack. The fact that the defendants in this case were my own family didn't change the fundamentals. That weekend, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter to be sent to each family member, stating clearly that I considered their behavior to be harassment and requesting no further contact. I documented every text message, every social media post, every conversation I could remember. I created a timeline of events, starting from the initial family meeting and tracking every escalation. It was clinical and methodical, and it made me feel slightly more in control. On Monday, I returned to work. I had a case conference scheduled with my team about an upcoming assault prosecution, and I needed to be sharp, focused, present. But as I walked through the courthouse corridors, I noticed people looking at me differently. Whispers that stopped when I got close. Sympathetic glances that made my skin crawl. In the break room, two junior prosecutors I barely knew were talking in low voices. They went silent when I entered. One of them, a woman named Melissa, gave me an awkward smile. "Hey, Vanessa. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said, pouring coffee I didn't want. "Why do you ask?" "Oh," she said, exchanging a glance with her colleague. "I just thought, with everything going on with your family, you might be having a hard time." My blood ran cold. "What do you know about my family?" I asked carefully. Melissa looked uncomfortable. "I saw a post," she said. "Someone shared it." "I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't have brought it up." "What post?" I said, though I already felt the ground shifting beneath me again. She pulled out her phone, pulled up Facebook, showed me. It was from my mother's account, posted sometime over the weekend. A long, emotional message about parental heartbreak, about children who forget where they came from, about a daughter too busy with her career to visit her father in the hospital after his heart attack. It didn't name me specifically, but it didn't have to. Anyone who knew the family would know exactly who she meant. The post had been shared 47 times. 47, the same number as my undefeated case record, which now felt like the pettiest thing to think about in this moment. The comments were worse. Friends of my parents offering sympathy and sharing their own stories of ungrateful children. Former neighbors I remembered from childhood expressing shock and disappointment. And several people I recognized from the legal community, colleagues and acquaintances, seeing this curated version of events and drawing their own conclusions about my character. I handed the phone back to Melissa. "Thanks for showing me," I said, my voice flat. She looked stricken. "I'm sure it's more complicated than it seems," she offered. "These things always are." In my office, I closed the door and stood with my back against it, trying to breathe through the panic rising in my chest. They'd gone public. They'd taken our private family conflict and weaponized it, turned it into a social media narrative designed to destroy my reputation. And it was working. I could see it in the way Melissa had looked at me, with pity and uncertainty, wondering if maybe I really was the cold, career-obsessed daughter the post described. My phone rang. "Judge Pemberton." I answered. "Caldwell," he said. "My chambers." "Now." I walked through the courthouse with my head high and my expression neutral, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. In Judge Pemberton's chambers, he was standing by the window, looking out at the rainy Portland street below. "Sit," he said without turning around. I sat. He was quiet for a long moment, then turned to face me. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to be honest with me. Did you refuse to visit your father in the hospital?" "No," I said. "I went to the hospital as soon as I heard. They told me I wasn't welcome there." He nodded slowly. "And the social media post your mother made?" "It's one side of a much longer story," I said. My family and I had a disagreement about money. They didn't like my response, and things escalated. The heart attack happened in the middle of all that, and now they're blaming me for it. Another nod. I've known you for 5 years, Vanessa, he said. I've watched you handle 48 cases with integrity and skill. I've seen you work with victims who've been through hell and treat them with more compassion than most people in this building. So I'm inclined to believe your version of events. Thank you, I said, and meant it. But, he continued, and my stomach dropped. Perception matters in this job. You know that. If the defense bar catches wind of this and starts painting you as someone with questionable character, someone who abandons family in crisis, it could affect your credibility in court. It could affect your cases. I know, I said quietly. So what do you suggest? Handle it, he said. Quietly and quickly. Talk to PR, consider a response that sets the record straight without getting into family drama. And Vanessa? He fixed me with a serious look. Make sure this doesn't become a distraction. Your work is too important to let personal issues derail it. I left his chambers feeling like I'd been punched. He was right, of course. In the justice system, a prosecutor's reputation was everything. If juries didn't trust me, if defense attorneys could point to my supposedly questionable character, every case I touched became vulnerable. My family had found the one weapon that could actually hurt me professionally, and they were using it with precision. I spent the rest of the day in meetings with the communications department, crafting a response that was factual without being defensive, clear without revealing too much. We need to humanize you, the PR director said. Make you sympathetic without making this into a tabloid story. In the end, we decided on a brief statement posted to my rarely used social media accounts, expressing love for my father and hope for his recovery while noting that family dynamics are private and complex. It was bland and careful, and it felt like surrender. That evening, Rochelle came over with wine and takeout for the second time in as many weeks. Your family is out of control, she said, after I'd filled her in on the day's events. They're trying to destroy you. I know, I said, too tired to muster much emotion about it. And it's working. People at the courthouse are looking at me differently. Judge Pemberton basically told me to make it go away or risk my career. So make it go away, Rochelle said. Fight back. Show them you're not someone they can push around. How? I asked. They control the narrative. They have the sympathetic story, the sick father, the worried mother. I'm just the career-obsessed daughter who couldn't be bothered to care. You're the prosecuting attorney with an undefeated record who specializes in taking down people who abuse power, she said. Use that. I looked at her, at the determination in her face, and something shifted inside me. She was right. I'd spent weeks being reactive, letting them set the terms, letting them make me the defendant in a trial I hadn't signed up for. But I was a prosecutor. I knew how to investigate. I knew how to build cases. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that people who behaved like my family was behaving usually had more than one victim. There were other stories, other patterns I could uncover if I looked hard enough. So what are you thinking? Rochelle asked, seeing my expression change. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that it's time to stop defending myself and start asking questions. About what? About why they needed $20,000 so desperately. About Isabel's nonprofit that she's always posting about. About Trevor's firm and those awards he keeps winning. About family finances and trusts and whether everything is as legitimate as it appears. Rochelle grinned. Now that's the Vanessa I know. Welcome back. The investigation started small, the way all good investigations do. I began with public records, the kind of information anyone could access if they knew where to look and had the patience to dig through bureaucratic databases. Isabel's nonprofit, Bright Futures Foundation, claimed to provide mentorship and scholarships for underprivileged youth in the Portland metro area. The website was polished and professional, full of stock photos of diverse teenagers smiling at laptops and testimonials that read like they'd been written by the same person. According to their most recent tax filing, they'd raised nearly $300,000 in donations over the past 2 years. I pulled the 990 forms, the public tax documents that nonprofits are required to file. The numbers told an interesting story. Bright Futures had significant administrative costs, nearly 60% of their total revenue. Isabel paid herself a salary of $85,000 as executive director, which seemed high for an organization that claimed to have only 2 full-time employees. There were consulting fees paid to something called Brennan Advisory Services, which a quick search revealed was Keith's LLC. $20,000 over 6 months for unspecified consulting work. The scholarship disbursements, the actual purpose of the organization, totaled less than $40,000. Either Bright Futures was spectacularly inefficient, or something else was going on. I made notes in a leather journal I'd bought specifically for this purpose, dating each entry, citing sources, building the kind of documentation trail I'd need if this ever went anywhere official. Trevor's architectural firm was next. Caldwell and Associates had a sleek website showcasing award-winning designs for commercial buildings and luxury homes. The awards page listed recognition from the Portland Business Journal, the Oregon chapter of the American Institute of Architects, and something called the Pacific Northwest Design Excellence Awards. I started cross-referencing. The Portland Business Journal Award was legitimate, given to 40 businesses in various categories. Trevor's firm had won in the emerging business category 3 years ago. The AIA award was trickier. I called the Oregon chapter directly, pretending to be a journalist doing a profile on young architects. The woman who answered was friendly and helpful, pulling up their records while we talked. She confirmed that Caldwell and Associates had been nominated for an award 2 years ago but hadn't won. There was no record of any award being given to them at all. When I asked about recent winners, Trevor's firm didn't appear on any list. The Pacific Northwest Design Excellence Awards turned out not to exist. Or rather, it existed as a website and a trademark name, but there was no actual organization behind it, no judging process, no ceremony. Just a service that businesses could pay to receive a plaque and the right to claim they were award-winning. Trevor had literally bought his accolades. Why would someone do that, I wondered, unless they needed the credibility for something? I dug deeper into Caldwell and Associates' public records, looking at business licenses, contractor registrations, anything that might tell me more. What I found was a pattern of projects that started but didn't finish. 3 commercial developments in the past 18 months that had been announced with fanfare, complete with architectural renderings and projected completion dates, but seemed to have stalled in the permitting phase. I pulled the permit applications. Each project had issues. Missing documentation, engineering reports that didn't match the designs, environmental impact assessments that raised red flags. In 2 cases, work had been halted by the city pending investigation into whether the applications contained false information. My brother, it seemed, was either incompetent or cutting corners in ways that could constitute fraud. Possibly both. I spent evenings after work following these threads, sitting at my dining table with my laptop and stacks of printed documents, post-it notes color-coded by family member and type of potential misconduct. Dominic came over most nights, bringing dinner and sitting quietly nearby while I worked, occasionally offering observations but mostly just providing steady company. He understood that I needed this, needed to reclaim some sense of control through the methodical process of investigation. One night, he looked over at my sprawling documentation system and shook his head with something like admiration. "You're building a case against your own family," he said. "Doesn't that feel strange?" "It feels necessary," I replied. "Besides, I'm not building a case. I'm just gathering information. What I do with it depends on what I find." "But you already know you're going to find something worth pursuing," he said. "Otherwise you wouldn't be doing this." He was right, of course. Some instinct honed over years of prosecution work told me that the desperation for $20,000, the aggressive reaction to my refusal, the willingness to destroy my reputation, all pointed to people who had something significant to hide. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was at the courthouse reviewing files for an upcoming domestic violence case when I ran into Patricia Vance, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on several white-collar crime prosecutions. We chatted briefly about her current caseload, and I mentioned in passing that I was looking into a nonprofit's financials for personal reasons. Her eyes lit up with professional interest. Nonprofit fraud is one of my specialties, she said. If you want a second set of eyes on anything, let me know. I'm always curious about organizations that might be misusing donor funds. I sent her Bright Futures tax documents that evening with a casual email asking if anything jumped out at her. 2 days later, she called me. We need to talk in person, she said. Can you meet me for coffee? We met at a place downtown, one of those aggressively hip Portland coffee shops where everything was reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs. Patricia arrived with a folder thick with printouts and notes. Your sister's nonprofit has some serious irregularities, she said without preamble. The administrative costs are a red flag, but that alone isn't necessarily illegal. What's concerning is the consulting payments to Brennan Advisory Services. I pulled incorporation records for that LLC. It was created 2 weeks before the first payment was issued, and it has no business history, no other clients, no apparent function except to receive money from Bright Futures. So it's a shell company, I said. Essentially, Patricia confirmed. And here's where it gets interesting. The address listed for Brennan Advisory Services is the same as your sister's home address. So Keith is being paid consulting fees by his fiancé's nonprofit, which is funded by tax-deductible donations, for work that may or may not be legitimate. That's not just unethical, she said. Depending on how they've structured everything, it could be tax fraud. There's more. She pulled out another document, a grant application Bright Futures had submitted to a local foundation. They claimed to have served over 200 students in the previous year, providing mentorship and scholarship support. But when I cross-referenced their tax filing, they only reported $53,000 in program expenses. The math doesn't work unless they're spending less than $300 per student, which would be basically nothing for meaningful support. So they're inflating their impact to get more donations, I said. And then using those donations to pay themselves and Keith through the consulting arrangement. Patricia nodded. I can't prove it definitively without access to their internal records, but the pattern is consistent with nonprofit fraud I've seen before. If you wanted to pursue this officially, there's enough here for the IRS to open an investigation. Maybe even enough for criminal charges if the intent to defraud can be established. I sat back, processing this information. My sister, who'd called me selfish and heartless, was potentially running a fraudulent charity. The irony was almost painful. Do you want me to write up a formal report? Patricia asked. I can document everything I've found. Not yet, I said. Let me think about what I want to do with this. She studied me carefully. This is your family, she said. That complicates things. It does, I agreed. But if they're stealing from people who are trying to help underprivileged kids, that complicates things too. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the people who donated to Bright Futures believing they were helping teenagers get scholarships, get mentoring, get a chance at a better future. People who'd written checks or clicked donate buttons, trusting that their money would go where Isabel said it would go. Instead, it was apparently funding her lifestyle and Keith's phantom consulting business. I thought about Caitlin, the 17-year-old from my fraud case who'd slept in her car because Marcus Henley had stolen the money meant to help her. How was what Isabel was doing any different? Both were taking resources meant for vulnerable people and using them for personal gain. Both were betraying trust for profit. The fact that one was my sister didn't change the fundamental nature of the crime. By morning, I'd made a decision. I called Patricia and asked her to prepare a detailed report documenting everything she'd found. Then I started drafting a referral letter to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I wasn't ready to send it yet, but I wanted it prepared, ready to go if and when I decided to pull that trigger. Meanwhile, my father had been released from the hospital and was recovering at home. I knew this only because Dominic had maintained contact with a family friend who was willing to pass along information. My family hadn't contacted me directly, maintaining their stance that I was dead to them. The social media posts had slowed but not stopped. My mother had shared an article about family estrangement with the caption, "Sometimes the most painful thing is watching your child become someone you don't recognize." Subtle. Always subtle. But the message was clear to anyone paying attention. The whispers at work had mostly died down, replaced by a cautious normalcy. People stopped asking how I was doing in that loaded way that meant they'd seen the posts. My statement about family being private and complex had been bland enough to deflect most questions. But I knew the damage was done, at least partially. There would always be colleagues who'd seen my mother's version of events first and would carry some residual doubt about my character. Judge Pemberton checked in with me weekly, ostensibly about cases but really to make sure I wasn't falling apart. I appreciated his concern even as I resented needing it. I threw myself into work with renewed intensity, using cases as both distraction and purpose. I prosecuted an elder abuse case where a caretaker had stolen $40,000 from a dementia patient. The parallels to my own situation weren't lost on me. People who abused positions of trust, who exploited vulnerability, who justified their actions with elaborate rationalizations about what they were owed or deserved. In my closing argument, I talked about how abuse often came from those closest to us, from people who claimed to care while systematically causing harm. The jury convicted in less than an hour. Dominic was there in the courtroom for the verdict, as he'd been for most of my recent trials. Afterward, as we walked to his car through another typical Portland drizzle, he asked the question he'd been dancing around for weeks. What are you going to do about your family? I mean really do, not just investigate. I don't know yet, I admitted. I have information now. I have evidence of things that are at minimum unethical and quite possibly illegal. But using it feels like crossing a line I can't uncross. They crossed that line first, he pointed out. When they tried to destroy your reputation. When they blamed you for your father's heart attack. When they erased you from the family like you never existed. I know, I said. But does their bad behavior justify mine? Does fighting dirty make me better or just different? He stopped walking, turned to face me directly. Vanessa, he said quietly. Holding people accountable for their actions isn't fighting dirty. It's literally your job. You don't give other defendants a pass because confronting them is uncomfortable. Why are you giving your family one? Because they're my family, I said, the same weak justification I'd used before. And that still matters to you, he said. Even after everything. It shouldn't, I said. But yes. It does. We stood there in the rain, under his umbrella, while I grappled with the truth of that admission. Some part of me, despite the disownment and the public humiliation and the systematic cruelty, still wanted reconciliation. Still hoped that somehow this could be fixed, that my family would wake up and realize they'd been wrong, that we could find our way back to some version of okay. It was irrational and probably pathetic, but it was honest. I can't move forward until I know for sure that there's no way back, I said. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Dominic replied. You need closure before you can go on the offensive. So how do you get it? I thought about that question for days. How did you get closure from people who refused to speak to you? How did you confirm that a relationship was truly over when the other parties were maintaining radio silence? The answer, when it came to me, was almost embarrassingly obvious. You gave them one more chance to do the right thing. I drafted an email to my parents, spending hours on the wording, trying to strike a balance between honest and accusatory. I explained my perspective on what had happened, acknowledged their pain and concern about my father's health, and asked if we could have a conversation, just the four of us, without my siblings present. I offered to meet anywhere they felt comfortable. I didn't apologize for having boundaries, but I did express genuine sorrow that our family had reached this point. I sent it on a Tuesday morning before I could overthink it further. Then I waited. 1 day passed. Then 2. Then a week. No response. The silence was its own answer, but I gave them more time, checking my email obsessively, hoping for something, anything, that would indicate they were willing to meet me halfway. After 2 weeks, my mother finally replied. Her email was brief. Vanessa, your father and I have discussed your message. We don't see the point in rehashing old arguments. You made your choices clear when you refused to help your sister and then abandoned your father when he needed you most. We have nothing more to say to you. Please don't contact us again. Mom. I read the email 3 times, looking for some hidden softness I might have missed, some indication that the door wasn't completely closed. There was none. The message was final and absolute. I forwarded it to Dominic without comment. His response came within minutes. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you hoped for. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," I wrote back and realized it was true. I wasn't devastated or shocked. I was sad, certainly, grieving for what I'd never had and now would definitely never have, but there was also clarity. I'd given them an opportunity to choose repair over righteousness, and they'd chosen righteousness. That told me everything I needed to know about what they valued. That evening, I pulled out the IRS referral letter I'd drafted and read through it one more time. Then I saved it to my desktop, still not quite ready to send it but no longer conflicted about whether I would eventually. My family had made their position clear. They wanted me gone, erased, treated as if I'd never been part of their lives. Fine. But if they were going to do that, they didn't get to also commit fraud with impunity while I stayed silent. I couldn't control what they thought of me or how they chose to remember our relationship, but I could control whether I enabled their misconduct through my inaction. Rochelle came over that weekend with her girlfriend Maya, a graphic designer I'd met a few times and genuinely liked. They brought groceries and insisted on cooking dinner in my kitchen, filling my apartment with the smell of garlic and rosemary and laughter. Over pasta and wine, I told them about my mother's email and the decision I was moving toward. Rochelle raised her glass. "To chosen family," she said. "The people who show up because they want to, not because they have to." We clinked glasses, and I felt something warm unfold in my chest. This was family too, I realized. This was what it looked like when people cared about you without conditions, when support didn't come with strings attached or prices to be paid. Maya asked about my cases, genuinely interested in the work I did, and I found myself telling stories I rarely shared, about victims who'd found the courage to testify, about juries who'd seen through manipulative defendants, about the small victories that made the hard days worthwhile. She listened with full attention, asking thoughtful questions, treating my work as important rather than as an obsession that made me unfit for human connection. "When did you know you wanted to be a prosecutor?" she asked. I thought back to law school, to the internship where I'd first observed a trial. I watched a prosecutor cross-examine someone who'd embezzled from a children's hospital, I said. The way she methodically dismantled his lies, the way she made the truth visible even when he tried to obscure it, it was like watching art. I wanted to be able to do that. To make truth matter in a world where people lie constantly. "And do you?" Rochelle asked. "Make truth matter?" "Sometimes," I said. "In courtrooms, at least, there are rules about evidence and burden of proof. Outside courtrooms, truth is more complicated. People believe what they want to believe regardless of facts." "But you keep trying anyway," Maya said. "That has to count for something." I hoped she was right. I hoped that persistence in the face of willing ignorance was worth something, even when the results were uncertain. Later, after they'd left and I was alone again in my quiet apartment, I opened my laptop and looked at my case record. 48 wins, 0 losses. Each one represented someone who'd been wronged and had found justice, at least in the legal sense. But I thought about all the cases that never made it to trial, all the victims who were too afraid or too exhausted to pursue charges, all the harm that went unpunished because the system wasn't perfect and neither were the people navigating it. My family would probably never face legal consequences for the way they'd treated me. There was no law against emotional manipulation, against rewriting history, against choosing cruelty over compassion. But if they were engaged in financial fraud, that was different. That had consequences I could pursue. The question was whether I was willing to be the one to pursue them. I made myself sit with the question, really sit with it, imagining what it would mean to move forward with a formal complaint. My family would know it came from me. They would paint me as vindictive, as someone so bitter about family conflict that I'd weaponized my legal knowledge against them. The extended family would almost certainly side with them. I'd become a cautionary tale, the lawyer who turned on her own blood. But I'd also be doing what I was sworn to do. Upholding the law. Protecting the public interest. ensuring that people who exploited charitable giving for personal gain were held accountable. When I framed it that way, the decision became clearer. On Monday morning, I requested a meeting with my supervisor, District Attorney Ellen Kowalski. She was a sharp woman in her late 50s who'd built a reputation for being tough but fair, someone who expected excellence but supported her prosecutors when they delivered it. I'd always had a good working relationship with her, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to doing the work right. In her office, I laid out what I'd discovered about Bright Futures Foundation, walking her through the financial irregularities, the shell company payments, the inflated impact claims. I was careful to be factual and unemotional, presenting it as I would any other potential case. Ellen listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me. "This is your sister's nonprofit," she said. "Yes," I confirmed. "And you're bringing this to me, why?" "Because if what I suspect is true, it's fraud. People are donating money under false pretenses. That's a crime regardless of who's committing it." She was quiet for a moment. "You know that recusal would be standard procedure here," she said. "You couldn't be involved in any investigation or prosecution." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking to be involved. I'm asking you to refer it to the appropriate authorities for review. If there's nothing there, they'll determine that. But if there is something, it should be investigated." Ellen nodded slowly. "You've thought this through," she said. "The personal cost of doing this. What it will mean for whatever's left of your family relationships." "I have," I said. "And I've decided that staying silent would be worse." She pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. "Walk me through it again," she said. "Every detail." I spent the next hour doing exactly that, recreating my investigation step by step, providing documentation, answering her questions with the precision I'd learned from years of building cases. When we finished, Ellen set down her pen and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You're sure about this?" she asked one final time. "I'm sure," I said. "All right," she said. "I'll make the referral this week." "And Vanessa?" This took courage. Not everyone would be willing to hold family accountable like this. I wasn't sure courage was the right word for what I was doing. It felt more like necessity, like finally stepping into the clarity that came from accepting things as they were rather than as I wished they could be. But I thanked her anyway and left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. The decision was made. The consequences, whatever they turned out to be, were now inevitable. All that remained was to move forward and see what came next. The IRS moved faster than I expected. Within 3 weeks of Ellen's referral, federal investigators had opened a formal inquiry into Bright Futures Foundation. I only knew because Patricia called me one afternoon, her voice tight with professional excitement. "They contacted me for an interview," she said. "Asked me to provide copies of all my analysis and to walk them through the financial irregularities. This is happening, Vanessa. They're taking it seriously." I felt a strange mixture of vindication and dread. Some part of me had hoped the investigation would reveal that I was wrong, that Isabel's nonprofit was legitimate and I'd simply misunderstood the financial structure. But a larger part of me, the prosecutor who'd learned to trust patterns and evidence, knew that wasn't going to be the case. The IRS didn't open investigations without cause. They'd seen what Patricia saw, what I'd seen, and recognized it for what it was. 2 months passed in a strange liminal space where I knew something significant was unfolding but had no direct visibility into the process. I continued my work at the DA's office, prosecuting cases with the same methodical precision that had built my reputation. I won my 49th case, then my 50th, milestones that would have felt momentous under different circumstances but now seemed almost incidental compared to the larger drama playing out in the background of my life. Dominic pointed out that 50 consecutive wins was extraordinary, that I should celebrate, but I couldn't muster much enthusiasm. The victories felt hollow when my personal life was such a disaster. Then one morning in early autumn, when Portland's rain had returned with its characteristic persistence, I got a call from a reporter at the Oregonian. "Ms. Caldwell," she said, "I'm working on a story about federal fraud investigations into local nonprofits." I understand your sister runs Bright Futures Foundation, which is currently under investigation. Would you care to comment? My stomach dropped. The investigation had gone public, or was about to. No comment, I said carefully. I'm not involved in any investigation and can't speak to allegations against any organization. The reporter pressed. But you are a prosecutor with the Multnomah County DA's office. Did you have any role in bringing this investigation forward? I'm not at liberty to discuss that, I said. You'll need to contact the IRS Public Affairs Office for information about their investigations. After I hung up, I sat at my desk trying to process what this meant. If reporters were calling, the story was about to break. My family would know, if they didn't already, that an investigation was underway. They'd probably assume I was behind it, even without confirmation. The fragile fiction that we were simply estranged, that this was a private family matter that would eventually resolve itself, was about to shatter completely. I called Dominic. The investigation is going public, I said without preamble. A reporter just called me. Do you want me to come over? He asked immediately. I have meetings all afternoon, I said. But tonight? Tonight, he confirmed. We'll figure out what comes next. The article ran the following morning, front page of the Metro section. Federal investigation targets local youth nonprofit amid fraud allegations. The piece laid out the basic facts. Bright Futures Foundation was under investigation for potential misuse of donor funds, tax fraud, and making false statements in grant applications. Isabel was named as the executive director. Keith was mentioned in connection with consulting payments. The article included quotes from donors expressing shock and betrayal, people who'd given money believing they were helping students and now felt deceived. There was a brief mention that the executive director's sister worked as a prosecutor, but no direct allegation that I'd initiated the investigation. My phone started ringing before I'd even finished reading the article. First call was from Aunt Carol, the one who'd sent me the group chat screenshot months ago. Vanessa, she said, her voice shaking. Please tell me you didn't do this. Tell me you didn't report your own sister to the federal government. I can't discuss ongoing investigations, I said, keeping my voice level. Carol, if there's fraud happening, it needs to be addressed regardless of who's involved. You destroyed your family, she said. Over money. Over some petty grudge. This is unforgivable. Then she hung up before I could respond, not that there was much I could say. The next call was from Trevor. His voice was cold with rage. You vindictive witch, he said. You couldn't stand that Isabel was successful, that she was doing something meaningful with her life while you were just another government drone. So you sicked the feds on her. I didn't respond, letting him talk himself out. Do you have any idea what you've done? He continued. She's going to lose everything. The nonprofit, her reputation, maybe even her freedom. And for what? Because she asked you for help and you were too selfish to give it? Trevor, I said quietly. If the investigation finds evidence of fraud, that's on Isabel, not on me. Don't give me that prosecutor bullshit, he snapped. You did this. You know you did. And when Mom and Dad find out, they're going to be devastated. They already think you're dead to them, but this? This is worse than anything they imagined. After he hung up, I turned off my phone and sat in the silence of my office. I'd known there would be backlash, but the venom in Trevor's voice still stung. The accusation that I was motivated by jealousy or pettiness rather than principle. The certainty in his tone that I was the villain in this story. I wondered if he genuinely believed that, if he'd somehow convinced himself that Isabel's nonprofit was legitimate and my actions were purely vindictive, or if he was just performing outrage to avoid examining whether his sister might actually be guilty. Judge Pemberton stopped by my office later that morning. I saw the article, he said, closing the door behind him. You holding up? As well as can be expected, I said. My family is predictably furious. He nodded, settling into the chair across from my desk. For what it's worth, he said, I think you did the right thing. If someone is defrauding donors, especially donors giving money to help kids, they need to be held accountable. Family doesn't get a pass on that. Thank you, I said, and meant it. His support, coming from someone whose opinion I respected, meant more than I'd expected. The next few days brought a deluge of attention I wasn't prepared for. Local news stations picked up the story. Social media erupted with hot takes about family loyalty versus legal duty. Some people praised me for having the integrity to report potential fraud regardless of personal relationships. Others vilified me as the worst kind of traitor, someone who'd weaponized her legal position against her own blood. The comments sections were brutal. People who'd never met me felt entitled to opinions about my character, my motivations, my fitness to be a prosecutor. One thread on a local Portland forum devolved into hundreds of comments debating whether family trumped everything else, with my situation as the case study. My mother posted on Facebook for the first time since her message about ungrateful children. She didn't mention the investigation directly, just shared a quote image that read, "The cruelest wounds come from those who are supposed to love you most." The post got 200 likes and dozens of sympathetic comments. I saw it because a colleague, trying to be helpful, showed it to me as a heads up. I wished she hadn't. The more complicated response came from my colleagues in the DA's office. Most were supportive, at least to my face, recognizing that holding family accountable required a particular kind of courage. But I could sense the discomfort underlying their support. I'd violated an unspoken code that family matters stayed private, that you didn't bring legal force to bear on your relatives no matter what they'd done. During a meeting about an upcoming trial, one of the other prosecutors made an offhand comment about how he'd never be able to do what I did, that family loyalty was sacred to him. It was said casually, maybe even unconsciously, but the implication was clear. My willingness to pursue my sister suggested something deficient in my capacity for loyalty, for love, for the bonds that supposedly transcended all else. I didn't respond, just filed the comment away with all the other small cruelties that had accumulated over the past months. Ellen called me into her office a week after the article ran. "The investigation is proceeding," she said. "I've been in contact with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They're building a substantial case. Preliminary evidence suggests your sister and her fiancé engaged in a systematic scheme to divert nonprofit funds for personal use. We're talking potential charges of wire fraud, tax fraud, and making false statements to federal agencies." I nodded, absorbing this information. It was what I'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed in such concrete terms made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "What happens now?" I asked. "They'll likely seek indictments within the next few months," Ellen said. "If your sister is smart, she'll cooperate and try to negotiate a plea. If she fights it, this could drag out for years. Either way, you need to prepare yourself for the attention that's going to come with being connected to a high-profile fraud case." "I'm already getting attention," I said. "This will be worse," she warned. "Once charges are filed, this becomes a major story. White-collar crime involving a charity that claimed to help disadvantaged youth. That's going to be everywhere. And your role in bringing it forward will be scrutinized." Over the following weeks, I settled into a routine that felt surreal in its normalcy. I went to work, prepared cases, tried them with the same competence I'd always brought to the courtroom. I saw Dominic most evenings, finding comfort in his steady presence and refusal to treat me like I was fragile. Rochelle checked in regularly, offering both practical support and righteous anger on my behalf. But underneath the surface of normal life was the constant awareness that I'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped, that would eventually culminate in a public reckoning I could only partially control. The indictments came down in November, just as Portland was settling into its long gray winter. Isabel Caldwell and Keith Brennan were charged with 19 counts including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, tax fraud, and making false statements to the IRS. The charging documents laid out the scheme in meticulous detail, how they'd inflated the nonprofit's impact to attract donors, created shell companies to funnel money to themselves, paid personal expenses through organizational accounts, and filed false tax returns to conceal their activities. The total amount of funds misappropriated was estimated at over $250,000. The news coverage was extensive and damning. Local stations ran investigative pieces about nonprofit oversight and donor due diligence, using bright futures as a cautionary tale. Several major donors gave interviews expressing their sense of betrayal, talking about how they'd trusted Isabel's polished presentations and compelling mission statements only to discover they'd been funding someone's lifestyle. One woman, a retired teacher who donated $5,000 she'd saved over years, cried on camera talking about how she'd hoped to help students like the ones she'd taught for 3 decades. That interview played on loop across Portland media, becoming the emotional centerpiece of the story. The article in the Oregonian about the indictments included a sidebar about me. Prosecutor's personal connection to high-profile fraud case raises questions about family loyalty. The piece walked through my relationship to the defendants, noted my role as an assistant district attorney, and included quotes from legal ethicists debating whether I'd done the right thing. Some praised my commitment to justice over personal loyalty. Others questioned whether I'd abused my position and knowledge of the law to target family members. The article stopped short of taking a position, presenting both sides as equally valid perspectives, but the damage was done. My name was now permanently linked to the case in a way that invited judgment. My family's response was swift and coordinated. My father released a statement through a family friend that was picked up by several news outlets. "We are heartbroken by these baseless allegations against our daughter Isabel," it read. "She has devoted her life to helping young people, and we believe these charges are the result of a vindictive campaign by her estranged sister, who has shown herself willing to destroy her own family to advance her career. We stand behind Isabel completely and look forward to her vindication in court." The statement was calculated to be just vague enough to avoid defamation while clearly painting me as the villain. It worked. The comments on the online articles shifted perceptibly after the statement was released, with more people expressing sympathy for Isabel as a victim of family betrayal rather than as someone who'd allegedly stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from donors. Dominic found me that evening sitting in the dark in my apartment, staring out the window at the rain-slicked streets below. He didn't say anything, just sat beside me and took my hand. After a long silence, I said, "What if they're right? What if I am vindictive? What if some part of me wanted this to happen because I was angry at them?" He squeezed my hand. "Vanessa," he said gently. "Having human feelings about being mistreated doesn't make you vindictive. It makes you human. And wanting accountability for fraud doesn't become wrong just because you also happen to be hurt and angry at the people committing it." "But I can't separate the two anymore," I said. "I can't tell where justice ends and revenge begins." "Maybe they're not as separate as you think," he offered. "Maybe justice always has an element of personal investment when you're the one who's been wronged. That doesn't invalidate it." He paused, then added, "You've won 50 cases, Vanessa." 50. How many of those victims wanted revenge on the people who hurt them? Probably all of them, I admitted. And did that make their desire for prosecution invalid? No. So why are you holding yourself to a different standard? "Because they were strangers," I said. "Because they came to me for help. I sought this out. I investigated my own family." "That's different." "Is it?" he asked. "Or is it just more direct? You saw evidence of a crime, you gathered documentation, you reported it to the appropriate authorities. That's literally what you're supposed to do. The fact that you personally benefited from seeing them held accountable doesn't change whether the underlying conduct was criminal." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to accept that I could be both hurt and right, angry and justified, personally invested and still acting appropriately. But the chorus of voices telling me I'd crossed some fundamental line was loud and persistent. My family, the online commenters, the colleagues who treated me with new wariness, they all seemed to agree that what I'd done was beyond the pale even if they couldn't quite articulate why. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for December, right before the holidays. I wasn't required to attend, wasn't involved in the prosecution at all, but I felt compelled to be there. To witness the consequences of the choice I'd made. To see my sister face the charges that I'd set in motion. Dominic offered to come with me but I declined. This felt like something I needed to do alone, some final confrontation with the reality of what I'd done and what it meant. The courthouse was packed with reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers when I arrived. I slipped in through a side entrance that prosecutors used, avoiding the main crowd, and found a seat in the back of the courtroom gallery. The space filled quickly, every seat taken, people standing along the walls. Isabel arrived with Keith and their defense team, a high-powered firm out of Seattle that specialized in white-collar crime. She wore a conservative navy suit and minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple style that projected humility and seriousness. It was a carefully crafted image, designed to counter the allegations of greed and self-dealing. She didn't look at the gallery, keeping her eyes forward as she took her seat at the defense table. Keith sat beside her, his jaw tight, his hand resting on her back in a gesture of support that the cameras would capture. The judge, a stern woman named Carolyn Fletcher who had a reputation for running an efficient courtroom, called the proceedings to order. The federal prosecutor, a methodical man named David Chen, outlined the government's case with clinical precision. He detailed the evidence they'd gathered, bank records showing personal expenses paid through non-profit accounts, emails discussing how to structure the consulting payments to avoid scrutiny, grant applications containing false information about the number of students served, tax returns that omitted income from the shell companies. It was devastating and comprehensive, exactly the kind of case I'd have wanted to bring if I'd been on the other side of it. Isabel's attorney, a sharp woman with steel gray hair, argued that the charges were based on misunderstandings of non-profit accounting practices, that any irregularities were unintentional errors rather than deliberate fraud, that her client had devoted years of her life to helping young people and deserved the presumption of innocence. It was a competent defense, but I could see the weakness in it. When you're arguing that complex financial irregularities were all innocent mistakes, you're already losing. Juries, and judges, understood that sophisticated fraud schemes didn't happen by accident. Judge Fletcher set a trial date for the following spring and outlined the conditions of Isabel and Keith's release. They'd remain free on bond but with travel restrictions and regular check-ins. As the hearing concluded and people began filing out of the courtroom, Isabel turned to scan the gallery. Her eyes found mine almost immediately. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the crowded room. I tried to read her expression, to see whether there was any acknowledgement of what she'd done, any understanding of why I'd made the choice I had. But all I saw was hatred, pure and absolute. Her lip curled slightly before she turned away, leaning in to whisper something to Keith. I left through the same side entrance I'd come in, but reporters had figured out I was there. "Ms. Caldwell," one called out. "How do you feel seeing your sister charged with these crimes?" I kept walking, not responding. "Do you have any regrets about coming forward? Do you think family loyalty should have kept you silent?" I pushed through the crowd, keeping my head down, until I reached my car. Inside, with the doors locked and the engine running, I finally let myself breathe. That night, I dreamed about the family dinner where this had all started. But in the dream, when they asked me for money, I said yes. I wrote them a check, smiled, played the role they wanted me to play. And then I watched as they used that money, and even more, until there was nothing left and they still wanted more. I woke up with my heart racing, understanding on some instinctive level that saying yes would never have been enough. That their needs would have expanded to match whatever I could provide. That the only thing that would have satisfied them was my complete subsumption into their wants and demands, my transformation into whatever version of myself they found most useful. In the morning, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my case files, preparing for an upcoming trial. Normal work. Normal routine. Outside my window, Portland's December rain fell steadily, washing the streets clean. The trial happened in April, when Portland finally shook off winter's gray and bloomed into something almost hopeful. Cherry blossoms lined the streets near the courthouse, their petals drifting like snow across the sidewalks. I didn't attend. By then, I'd learned that watching didn't change outcomes, that my presence only fed a narrative I had no control over. Instead, I followed the coverage from a distance, reading articles that summarized each day's testimony, the evidence presented, the witnesses who described donating money they believed would help students. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When the verdict came down, guilty on 16 of 19 counts, I was in my office preparing cross-examination questions for an assault case. Dominic texted me the news. I stared at my phone for a long moment, waiting to feel something definitive. Relief, vindication, even sadness. Instead, I just felt tired. The machinery of justice had turned as it was supposed to, evidence had been weighed, a verdict rendered. My sister would face consequences for what she'd done. None of that changed the fact that my family was gone, that whatever chance we'd had for repair had been incinerated in the heat of this very public battle. Isabel was sentenced 3 months later to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the donors she defrauded. Keith received a similar sentence. The judge's statement at sentencing was pointed, talking about the betrayal of public trust and the particular cruelty of exploiting people's desire to help young people in need. My mother collapsed in the courtroom and had to be helped out by Trevor and my father. The photos of that moment ran in every local outlet, my family's anguish on full display. I didn't see the photos until Rochelle showed them to me days later, asking if I was okay. I studied my mother's face, twisted in grief, and felt something crack inside me. Not guilt, exactly, but a profound sorrow for all of us, for the way we'd arrived at this point through 1,000 small failures of understanding and compassion. She believed she was mourning her daughter. I'd been mourning my family for months. We were experiencing the same loss from opposite sides, each certain the other was to blame. That summer, I took a vacation for the first time in years. Dominic and I drove down the coast to California, staying in small towns and hiking along cliffsides where the ocean crashed against rocks in endless rhythm. We didn't talk about my family or the trial or any of it. We talked about books and food and whether I'd ever consider leaving Portland. The question surprised me. "Would you?" he asked. "If you could start fresh somewhere nobody knew your story?" I thought about it while watching pelicans dive for fish in the gray-green water. "Maybe," I said. But I think I'd miss the rain. When we returned, I found my apartment exactly as I'd left it, which felt somehow significant. My life had continued while I was gone, cases had been reassigned, the office had functioned without me. The world didn't stop because my personal life had imploded. There was something reassuring about that, about the way work and purpose existed independent of family drama and public scandal. I won my 51st case, then my 52nd. Judge Pemberton started joking that I was going for a record nobody would ever break. One evening in early fall, almost exactly a year after the family meeting that had started everything, I was walking home from the courthouse when I saw my father. He was standing outside a coffee shop on Morrison Street, looking older than I remembered, his shoulders curved in a way that suggested defeat. We made eye contact across the street. For a moment, I thought he might turn away. Instead, he crossed toward me, navigating traffic with the careful steps of someone who'd learned not to trust his body. "Vanessa," he said when he reached me. His voice was hoarse. "Can we talk?" I gestured to a bench near the bus stop. We sat with a foot of space between us, two people who shared DNA and history and almost nothing else. "I don't know what to say to you," he began. "Your mother thinks I shouldn't be here. Trevor said I was betraying Isabel by even considering reaching out. But I needed to see you. To understand." "What do you want to understand?" I asked quietly. He was quiet for a long time, watching people pass on the sidewalk, the ordinary flow of life continuing around our extraordinary conversation. "Why you did it," he finally said. "Whether you hate us that much." "I don't hate you," I said. "I never did." "Then why?" he asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. "How could you do that to your sister? To your family?" "Because she was stealing from people who trusted her," I said. "Because that's wrong regardless of who's doing it." "But she's your sister," he said, as if that explained everything, as if family was supposed to be a shield against consequences. "Yes," I said. "And you're my father. And when I needed you to see me, to believe me, to consider that maybe your other children weren't telling you the whole truth, you chose to believe I was the problem. You threw me out. You told me I wasn't a Caldwell anymore. So forgive me if family loyalty feels like a concept that only works in one direction." He flinched like I'd struck him. "We were trying to protect the family," he said weakly. "By destroying me," I countered. "By taking something private and making it public. By blaming me for a heart attack. By writing me off completely. How was any of that protecting family?" "I don't know," he admitted, and his voice broke. I don't know what we were thinking. We just wanted things to be okay, and you were the one making it complicated. No, I said gently. Things were already complicated. I was just the one unwilling to pretend they weren't. We sat in silence while evening descended around us, streetlights flickering on, the city transitioning from day to night. Finally, he stood. I should go, he said. Your mother will worry. I nodded. Take care of yourself, Dad. He started to walk away, then turned back. For what it's worth, he said, I'm sorry. For all of it. I'm sorry we didn't do better by you. I watched him disappear into the crowd, this man who'd given me life and then taken away my place in his. The apology didn't fix anything, didn't heal years of being unseen and undervalued. But it was something. An acknowledgement, however inadequate, that maybe I hadn't been entirely wrong. That night, I made dinner in my small kitchen while Dominic worked at my table, our lives intertwined in comfortable routine. Rochelle called to gossip about office politics. Judge Pemberton sent an email about a case he wanted my thoughts on. Ordinary moments, ordinary connections, the architecture of a life I'd built without my family's approval or participation. I stood at my window watching rain begin to fall, Portland returning to its natural state, and I thought about how justice and peace weren't the same thing. Justice had been served. My sister faced consequences. The truth had been established in a court of law. But peace was quieter, more personal. It was learning to stop waiting for your family to understand you. It was choosing the people who chose you back. It was winning your 53rd case and realizing that success didn't require anyone's permission but your own. I turned away from the window to find Dominic watching me with a soft expression. You okay? He asked, the question he'd asked 100 times over these difficult months. This time, I smiled. Yeah, I said, and meant it completely. I really am. Outside, the rain fell steady and constant, washing everything clean, making space for whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.